recording. I'll call the meeting to order. This is the October 3rd meeting of the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. I'm your chair, Paul Bohm. I want to let you know that I added to my skill set. I opened up the building. I booted up the computer. I got Zoom going.
And he didn't even have to refer to some 17-year-old
Well,
for advice.
I had to call Chris
Yeah,
Carpenter
that's
for Lifeline. I called him up. Something wasn't working. Thank you, Chris. So let me start by calling the roll. We have I think we have a quorum. I think we have two people that are not in attendance. I think both Kurt Herman and Pam Hill will not be joining us, but let me call the roll. Harry Flood,
I am here.
Carl Seidman,
Here.
Rich Feely,
Present.
Art Booth,
Present.
David Ropeik,
Here.
Gary Kleiman,
Here.
and I'm Paul Bohm. We are all here. So it feels like it's been a while since we've met. I don't know. I've had a lot of conversations about the site and things going on. So we'll talk about that. I want to welcome people on Zoom. I see Nancy James is on there, Kat West, Matt Robbie. We have was Pam Rockwell, our associate, is here in the room. I think Brian Roseborough is in the room as well. Anybody else here? So welcome. What I want to do, usually we squeeze in the minutes right at the end, but I figured I'd start with the minutes. And thanks. Carl had one change. And again, thank you, Rich, for your minute taking. You're doing that again tonight, I assume?
Was told not to.
Anytime you want to do it, you are more than welcome.
You're great, doing a great job. So there was one change, and I thought I had that change here. Carl, do you want to mention
Sure.
that change?
Under the description of the operational cost impacts, I was just gonna change where it says work stream is looking for data on 3 separate categories of costs. I just want to delete that description of categories and then insert a new one that says ongoing cost of institutional control activities, capital cost for infrastructure necessary for the site's reuse, and operating and maintenance of town-owned site infrastructure and town services. I think
So there's 3 changes with that description of the economic work stream. Are there any other? And I have written those down, and I will make those changes before the minutes are submitted if they're approved. Any other comments or changes on the minutes?
Move approval with the amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Minutes
Thank you.
accepted, and we're moving on. So first order of business, in terms of general updates, well, I'll say a little bit more about the select board meeting, but the good news is that the budgets for legal assistance and additional assistance on the risk side of things were approved. And it was I'll go into a little bit of detail now. It was a really good conversation. The select board is very supportive and very interested in what we're doing. There were a number of comments. So the funding for the $47,000 that we asked for is coming out the ARPA funds that are left over. Those ARPA funds were designated for economic development, and as Kerry described it to the select board, the 2229 Main Strip represents an economic development opportunity should the town proceed with that acquisition. And of course, that's far from being decided yet. There were a couple of questions, one on the funding. Mark Howell asked if basically if this was the end of our funding requests. And so I said, I think this will take us to the finish line for this report, but there will be additional legal costs, after the report, if the select board wants to.
Well, finish your homework.
Hi, Kara. Okay, you're muted.
Hi,
So-
sorry, I'm here.
That's okay.
And our homework is done.
There would be additional costs in the future, but as far as getting us to the finish line with our report, I hope I did misspeak, but I think this will take us to the finish line.
We'll see.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
Mina Markarius submitted his request, and I think both Court and Pam Hill will start fleshing that out in some detail.
Mhm.
I think Rue's budget will take them through the point of submitting their risk report. It won't take them through risk communication, but we don't know exactly how that's going to pan out. It's up to David and Kurt to figure out how we're going to use Rue, the risk communication part of this, but they're actually doing the risk assessment. So that was Mark's comment. Mary Hartman, it's unclear what her position is right now, but she asked a very good question. Are we considering the town not acquiring a site? Are we considering that option? And I said, we are. And that itself could be several options. It could be that town doesn't acquire the site and a private party acquires the site. And then the question that Mary had is how can we control, quote unquote, control the site? And I said, we'll have a lot more to say about that in the report, but we are taking up that part of the work stream. And what if the town doesn't acquire the site and a private party does? Lots of questions there, what control we have and what use can the town make of a site that's owned by a private party? So the answer is yes, for doing that. She asked about costs of ownership and acquisition. I said, we don't know that yet, but we will have that as part of the report. Mary then asked about liens, and Linda Escobedo asked about liens, because that's an important potential cost element up front. And I said, we're looking into that. That's, I mean, the town council's probably first job or second job is to really engage with the lien holders to figure out where we stand, if those liens are still active and whether they can be forgiven or negotiated. So the answer is yes, we're looking at that, but we don't have the answer. I told the select board we didn't have any answers yet. And
But
we don't.
pardon my interrupting, it's great to hear the questions they're asking as one constituency out there. There might be something that we haven't noticed. There might be priorities that we want to shift. It's a great conversation
That's
to report back the details. Thank
They
you.
are our primary.
They are the
audience.
customer.
Yeah.
And what happens, when they receive our report, what action did they take with respect to town meeting or not?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah,
We're also a conduit of a lot of input to the town that might not come directly to us. So the more questions, the merrier, and thanks for the details.
Cool.
I think another important question Mary asked was, can we accomplish the protections we might want merely with zoning? And I think, Paul, you wisely didn't get into the layering and so on that we've been discussing, but the answer is, yeah, we're looking at that.
Yeah, that's part of the quote unquote control of development. Well, the general issue of control of development, control of zoning. So that's down the road, and we're doing that. Henry Dane reiterated that he said this could be an enormous asset or an enormous liability, which I think I've heard from Henry before. He's sort of he wants to know about both issues, wants to know about the opportunity and what the liability is, and we're definitely it's front and center what we're looking at. And he's very supportive and very complimentary of the work, as was Mary Hartman and everybody else on the select board. Henry mentioned that if we come up with any, how should I put it, interesting information or critical information along the way, they'd like to hear about it. If there are any stoppers, for example, and we've talked about, issues that, for example, if we can't resolve any of the liens and there's $30 million sitting out there, that's something the select board needs to know. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but are there any key issues that we come across? And I told Henry and the select board that we'd be happy to, all of us or any one of us would be happy to brief them on any of these issues along the way. I think staying engaged with the select board, as you say, they are the prime customer. They have a lot of things to think about, and probably 5 minutes after the meeting, the 59 Main Street probably evaporated a bit. But I think it has more staying power now because, and I think I mentioned this, there's a lot more interest in the town about the site. There's a lot of the housing stakeholders in town really have their eyeballs on the site. the MBTA, multiple use, the law, I've had some interaction with Linda Miller, the planning board, because the planning board has to put before the town, a town warrant of what, and to meet the MBTA law requirements, they have to identify which areas would be zoned for multiple use housing. And apparently, I didn't know this, that only 50% of that area needs to be within a half mile. This 50% could be outside. So
One of those three scenarios that they presented at the public meeting has 2229 in it.
so Linda asked me,
If I understand, that has to be by right. It has
yes,
to be multifamily housing by right.
right. Linda asked me if what the overlap is between our work and her work, and I said, look, Linda, I said, we're considering all options for the site, but we're far from considering housing and whether we want to recommend that or whether we can recommend it. So as far as designating 2229 as for multiple use housing, my opinion was that it was putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because for her to designate that and put before the town this upcoming town meeting that 2229 is going to be used for multiple use housing when we haven't even considered it. I thought it was not preemptive, but premature.
It raises a communication issue, if I may. I've also heard from a handful of people, hey, you should use it for that. Hey, don't use it for that.
Right.
So their mind is already on how's the land going to get used? And it is the cart before the horse. And so we, I think as a committee, need to make clear that there's a whole lot of smoke we got to get out of the way before we're even there. It's not as though we don't want to hear these interests. We do, obviously, and we will ultimately get to ideas for what it can be used for, and the reuse committee already has that. But people are thinking about this committee as almost like a reuse committee, and there's all this other stuff that we have to focus on first.
Yeah, but
And I'm also
ahead.
hearing from people who are interested in the housing aspect that they're thinking of the whole site and not multiple uses on the site, some of which might be housing. You know, they're not up to speed necessarily on
Well,
on what can be done.
let's just table it. I'm just trying to give you an update on sort of
Okay.
my conversations. We'll be talking about housing and recreation and municipal, we'll be talking about uses a lot, but so it was my opinion, and I just want to run that by you, that the planning board should not put the 229 Main Street on the warrant article as one of those multiple use housing zoning areas. Because we have to decide whether we're going to recommend that or whether it's safe or whether it's risky. It's way ahead of us. So, and she wasn't pushing, she was just asking. But, this really points that there's a lot of housing interests and other interests in town, that the need for 2 years ago, and Gary knows this, we were sitting out here with the reuse committee and there was not a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest from various perspectives, yays and nays, various uses. So I think we just need to keep our ears open and try to, as part of the outreach, and I want to discuss that, try to engage not only with the public at large, but with committees and departments and, entities, because, as Kerry LaFleur mentioned, it's a tremendous potential economic asset, but there are lots of questions. And so there's more recognition now on the asset side, I think, than there was 2 years ago when we were in the throes of the reuse work. So that was my conversation with Linda on housing. And the last one, because I'm also on the Recreation Commission, the strategic plan is being finalized, and 2229 Main Street is very prominent in that plan as well as a potential. There's less finality in putting that into a strategic plan like that than there is in putting it into a warrant article. So I had no objection to that appearing in a strategic plan as a possibility. Because there aren't many, areas that you can build stuff in town. So the consultant is in the spirit of brainstorming is putting that in the plan. So there are lots of people thinking of the plan. So that's kind of my general updates.
So can I ask,
Yeah.
have you captured your synopsis of what the select board, the planning board, other recreation commission are thinking about the site? Because, we're in a process, as you say, for the reuse work stream, we're in a similar process. We're meeting with various groups. We're trying to capture those sentiments, document them. And so I'm wondering Rich is taking notes, so I guess we have them documented in the minutes. But Rich, do you think we need to somehow capture it more formally so we can integrate it with the other?
I mean, I think we put what Paul said in the minutes. and
Okay.
We go from there. I mean,
Okay.
like the rec plan, it could be, the drawing I understand is in the strategic plan is essentially for all the usable part of the site. But you could also split it too and have some rec and something else.
But you raise a good point, and I think I should write up what I found, because we're gonna have other encounters,
Right, we're trying to document what we're hearing from, the Council on Aging, what we're hearing from, the Economic Vitality.
Are you
group.
coordinating who you guys are talking to?
No, that's what I'm saying, is
They're
we're
the buyer.
coordinating who we're talking. to
You
because
two
we're
are,
the reuse
but
work
you're,
stream.
you're as the point person having these conversations, we should
Well,
know who's having them.
This is a major topic, outreach, okay, which I want to talk about. So I think starting tonight, we ought to, looking forward, we ought to say, who are we going to be talking to between now and the next meeting? So I think we should put that in the minutes. We should put that, on a regular basis, we should be,
Coordinating that.
planning, coordinating.
We're
and
not
making sure-
crossing paths or.
Making sure we capture the information, absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about average, so that's the general updates. Let's hold off on the rest of the outreach, let's just go around the table and the general work stream updates, if anybody has any updates or things that happened since the last meeting. Rich?
Well, I think at this point, we've seen 4 of the 6 town departments that are potential users. We still need to talk to the light board and DPW.
I'm sorry, you've had meetings with them?
Yeah, with the director of recreation, economic development,
Vitality,
COA
transportation.
and transportation. I've had the first sort of interview with somebody in the development community. I've got another one scheduled. Nairobi's trying to set up a couple, so I would imagine those will occur before the next meeting. And the tenor of those is just, would developers be interested once it's up to the plan standard? And what would they be most interested in? And would it take incentives for them to get there? So that's kind of what we're asking. The most recent one was focused on housing and multi-use, but that's because that's what that person has experienced.
Carly,
Yeah, it might be interesting, it might be helpful to talk to them a little bit about like what infrastructure has to be at the site for them to want to proceed, or is the site valuable enough for them that they would fund the infrastructure themselves?
I'm really curious, and I know there's somebody in the room I should talk to about this. When you talk to a private developer / investor, what forms that could take with the town? Carl, you covered this in the reuse report, various issues of, of partnerships and
Right.
joint investment, and I'm very curious what
Yeah.
forms
Well,
those can take, and we have to
Yeah.
flesh that out.
Yeah, I mean, one issue might be interesting, would someone be interested, should the decision be made to use the site entirely for private development? Would there be a developer that would quote serve as a master developer? They would take the entire site. They would they would install the infrastructure. They'd look for, other developers to come in and build housing or build, entertainment facilities or offices or whatever. That as opposed to, breaking it up into individual sites, looking for separate developers to develop individual
And in
sites.
that case, is the town responsible for providing whatever infrastructure is required to support those various uses?
Or does the town lose control of, what might be a nice amenity of, a 20-acre
Right.
wetland and sphagnum bog and, like,
Yeah.
if a
Yeah.
private developer takes it, then,
Well,
yeah,
you
they
wouldn't,
have to.
you could exclude that from what
You
you,
could.
what you.
Right,
what you-
such
Well,
yeah.
can you, if
Yeah,
you're not, if
yeah,
the town is
absolutely.
not acquiring the site?
We could acquire that portion of the site,
Okay.
Or acquire it and sell part of it.
I mean,
or it could make, yeah,
so we're, yeah,
But that-
or it could acquire it. I wasn't saying the master developer would be separate from the town. The town could acquire the site and then
EPA,
select a master developer.
Obviously,
To
one of the
develop it.
questions we keep asking.
But
is,
Hey,
for
well,
far ahead of us.
conversations, but the purposes of people
Yeah.
listening,
Okay.
just one at a time.
the EPA is not of the same mind.
Mhm.
They want to move it as a single unit. Then it could be carved up,
Mhm.
but the exit plan for EPA is in its entirety at the present time.
Is that because it's cleaner for them? More expeditious? Why that priority?
I would guess so. I mean, my general sense is they want to move this off the roster.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think through why they would have that all or nothing
Well,
priority.
it's legally one entity, so if they want somebody to sign a null,
Yeah.
notice of
Institutional
activity
control.
use limitation, they need somebody to sign for that
Someone's
property.
taking
a person.
responsibility.
Okay,
And the
Yep.
question is whether
as I
the
thought.
site could be divided afterwards. Pieces resold is something that town council is gonna have to figure out. If and when, he sits down, but one thing, and I believe Mary Hartman mentioned this, I have to check the select board video. She mentioned, I think the question was, can the town control it by leasing? And I didn't quite know what she meant by that, but, I'll probably have to watch the video and talk to her again, but the town could acquire the site and then
Do-
lease it, and
Yeah,
then,
I mean,
have
like
to
your
develop
ground-
the leasing.
Yeah.
And zoning, but we still would own the site and be responsible for the,
That was one of the 4 options that we had. in the
Yeah,
prior
so-
report, yeah.
so there, this is great, we're having a conversation, we have to flesh out these various options and come up with sort of a preferred option and why. We have 9 months to do that, tick, 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 time. I don't know, Gary, how long, as an aside, I forget how long it took us to write the reuse report, but,
It was 18 months.
no, but I mean, from the time we
Oh.
can sit down and writing it, a
Yeah.
couple months. So, anyway, we have time. Rich and Gary is on the reuse part, okay.
I think that's it.
Carl and Carrie?
Yeah, I mean, we're really working on 2 things. One is creating a set of questions, information requests for different town departments to try and understand what infrastructure improvements would be needed for the site, what the costs for that would be, what the maintenance of that would be, how reuse of the site would impact town services. So we're developing a set of questions. Our thought was after the reuse work stream has finished its work with town departments, we then, reach out with another set of questions. So we're hoping to finish that over the next 2 or 3 weeks and then share that with the committee to get broader feedback
The list of
on that.
questions, not.
Right,
not
the list,
answers.
the list,
Because
list of
the answers
questions.
definitely depend
And, yeah,
on,
yeah. And some of the information will depend on uses ultimately, but our thought was to give them the master plan that is in the first report, with the notion that if you were to look to develop those, have new uses on those different parcels, you'd have to extend water or electric or, have roads that service them or whatever. So that would sort of be a basis for at least initially estimating costs. Obviously, we could refine that as the reuse options get refined.
Have you talked to, or have you plans to talk to Maximus and on the cleanup? Now for years, the Maximus and EPA have been saying that they'd like to know what we're gonna reuse the site for, because
Right.
they're putting utilities, they're putting
Right.
infrastructure on
Yeah.
the site. They want to do that.
Yeah.
Well,
But one of the
This-
questions,
we've raised the question, but.
they're
we
not gonna
haven't
add to
answered
the
it.
budget, but how do
Yeah.
they spend their?
well, we have some of the questions we're asking the town is, what might be done in the reuse, in the cleanup of the site that would make it
Mm.
easier for you to install the infrastructure or reduce your costs. So we are trying to get some feedback on that, what grading of the site would be necessary for like roads. And then hopefully we'd get some guidance then that would, we could work with the Maximus on. But once folks see the questions, we could refine them. The other piece I know that Pam and Carrie have started to do is to reach out to some of the other communities that SKIO gave us names for, to kind of learn more about their reuse process and institutional controls and what that's entailed. So hopefully we'll have some information from that process too.
And I know institutional control management costs are kind of in your work stream. And I teed it up for later discussion so we can kind of talk about those pieces as a separate item. So,
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Court on the.
We now can meet with town council. We've got our first session a week from Thursday. We expect Terry Ackerman will be there. We expect Paul will be there. We expect that Chris Carmody will be there. We have had inquiries from Kat at SKIO. Would she want to join us? And we were quite emphatic in saying no. We want to work with her independently of our work with town council, so that the role of any experts like Kat inform us to be a critical participant with MENA, but not start our de facto negotiations with somebody that reports to EPA, when ultimately we're going to have to negotiate with EPA. So that's where that stands right now.
Going back to sort of taking notes at these sidebar meetings, the discussions with Mina are particularly interesting and potentially sensitive. I think we got to kind of get the rules down there, because we're not everything that we talk about is confidential, but at some point it can be.
We're going to need clear lines, what's privileged, what isn't, so we don't blunder. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Are there going to be enough people in that meeting that it's subject to public meeting?
No, we're keeping it under the quorum, and we're
Yeah, our quorum was 5.
Okay.
But this is well under that. So,
yeah, good point though.
good. Going to Chris, Mina has this budget now, and so should be off and running.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in a sense, it's Mina's meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ours, but he considers it his, and that's fine.
Yeah. My big question for Mina: show us how to do it. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Well, and I will say, what we've learned is he is diving into this area, not for the first time,
Right.
thankfully. So we're not going to pay him for a steep learning curve, I think.
Back to what Henry was mentioned, select board meeting. I think the critical items that could derail things, probably more on the legal side than anything else. Now, I'm not sure. Well, unless the cost of development, ballooned into some unacceptable number. But so I think that getting on top of sort of those linchpin items we talked about that earlier with him, I think are really important.
I will add one other thing, and that is Pam and I believe it would be wise to identify, if we can, 1 or 2 communities who went through a process like this and said no, and examine how and why was that so, by what criteria was that judgment rendered, and so on. We haven't found that community, although we are told by SKIO that of the 500 to 1,000 active sites with EPA, we're on a very short list of 60 that has a consultant like SKIO, which gives you a sense of EPA's priorities.
An issue that just popped into my mind and something was called to about reaching out to other communities. So I'm just going through my database of communities that I covered as a reporter that went through this, and they were apples and oranges. So it'd be something to obviously pay attention to. How much are we talking to apples and apples? Is
Mhm.
gazillion different demographics
Oh,
in the community,
exactly,
politics, cost, budget, the mess of the liens and who the own and so you know this, but I just
Right.
wanted to put it on the
Yeah, I
table.
mean, it's hard to know necessarily.
Oh, obviously, but that's,
I mean,
you know, part of
yeah.
your filtering down the candidate communities to
Yeah.
talk to. That's one of the
Yeah.
things to bear in mind.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for the last committee, we did put together a little bit of a database of some of the sites, and then we did some, you could, if you look at the report, there are some short case studies in the end, and we tried to find ones that were somewhat comparable, but it was hard. A lot of the sites are very big, for example, you know, so, but.
To your point, I think we can learn from evaluated criteria, but not how they work that criteria necessarily.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nobody's gonna match this. But size and budget and demographics and the contaminants and the stage of the cleanup they're at and the 20 years that Pam's been working on, we who more compares or not, enough said.
It was also hard to get that information on all the, you know. I mean, I know when we did our research, we looked a lot at these write-ups that EPA did, and they're inconsistent in terms of what they emphasize and how much data they provide and stuff like that. There might be more information from other sources.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in the discussion you and I had the other day was, what if towns have gone through a similar process and acquired the site and are now living with that decision? Are there things in retrospect that they didn't consider early on that they wish they had? That could be an important
Carl,
lesson.
one quick thought. As a reporter, I would go to these reports, yes. But I'd mostly call people and just talk
Right.
too.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know the history and have been around, et cetera. So a combination of ways, yeah.
Oh, Matt, did you have a comment?
I did, because I was on the last task force meeting and Pam Hill reminded me that she had made that request previously, and I said, yes, we probably could do that. I have some anecdotes of examples of those communities that are where municipalities in the course of doing reuse planning contemplated taking ownership of a Superfund site, but decided not to do that. And they include a site called Stamina Mills in North Smithfield, Rhode Island, a portion of the Peterson Puritan Superfund site in Cumberland, Rhode Island, and as well as a property that may be kind of comparable in development area size to NMI in Amesbury, Mass. And so if there's a point when you want to hear our take on those, I'm happy to share it. I can do it now in a couple minutes, but I think
No, I think hold off on that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. We need those, we need those stories. And I think it's true. No two towns are the same, no two Superfund sites are the same, no two towns have the same needs.
Yeah.
There's just, so there'll never be a perfect match.
Yeah.
Right? And we're not looking for that, but I think just getting enough information that we can relay to the public, you know, other municipalities have been through this and made decisions to acquire and not to acquire, and the reasons why and what concerns. I think most communities would have similar concerns. And how, you know, what questions do they ask? I think those are important issues, you know, because I think we would find a lot of similarities when you talk to different communities. What were their concerns? Their economics, their risk, their, you know, they're probably all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to short circuit it. We'll get to it, Matt, probably not this meeting, because I
Yeah,
want to
that's
have
fine.
separate discussions on that. Risk communication risks, any,
Nothing new to report. Paul's been taking most of the lead in terms of outreach to the paper and, you know, the kind of front of the community reaches out to the head of the body. I've just had informal conversations. The only thing I would report is I gave a close look to the tag grant that you sent around that the state is floating. And I have serious questions as to whether we would qualify based on the kinds of things that they're looking to focus on, which is helping the public understand the technical and complicated issues, I think is the phrase they used, involved in cleanup. But it is a lot of public outreach focus, so I paid attention to it. We can talk about that when it comes around.
Yeah, I want to talk about the tag grant opportunity. It's not on the agenda, but if there's some time issues.
Yeah, just to put people's mind, I'm 50-50 on whether we'd qualify.
Yes. So to your point, I'm not taking the lead on.
Oh, it's just a fallen that way.
communication.
No, it's fallen that way.
I'm the setup man.
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah.
setup man because I get calls.
If anybody wants to know, who do you call? The boss.
Well, but not to answer the question, but to put up a set of PowerPoint slides. I can do that in my sleep. Okay, great. Anything else on updates or questions for each other on next steps? As far as upcoming, upcoming, you have the legal meetings upcoming. Did we cover all the important upcoming interactions that we all know about? I think we did.
We're attendees on the 29th, is it?
That's what I wanted to know. When do we have these?
The
What do you-
the EPA.
Oh,
Is
we're
EPA
gonna,
having a meeting?
we're gonna get to them. Just, I'm talking about the work streams. Yeah. So let's get into that topic here. So I call them the first set of outreach efforts, and they were both planned and unplanned, right? So, the select board meeting had a different topic, but it's one sort of outreach to our main customer. I have been invited to the League of Women Voters meeting this Friday. I think both Court and David are gonna be there with me. I think Terry Ackerman will be there as well. So Diane Proctor invited, that whole topic is of interest to a lot of people. So I'm going to, and I don't have a set of slides for you guys to review it. Basically, what I'm gonna do is introduce the site and our work stream, the history of the site. I'm gonna assume a combined role of the task force and EPA. So give them a little bit of history of the site, a little bit of cleanup, how the money's been spent, the various town committees that have been working on this for a long time, and what the charge of our committee is and what we're being asked to do. We don't have any conclusions or opinions, or I see Terry has joined us. Hi, Terry. That's coming up this Friday, and I think that's an important set of outreach, because we're going to hear a lot of questions, suggestions, concerns, and I think to the point of what happens next. I think each time we listen to the public, we're going to think about other avenues for outreach, other groups, and other mechanisms for outreach.
Well, I got,
Hello.
so I got a lot of feedback from League of Women Voters people, because they actually advertised your presentation as a presentation from the Oversight Committee. And so everybody thought maybe I died or something. So
Pam will be there too.
yeah, I will be there too, but I'm gonna say that a big part of what you need to do is talk about this focused attempt to figure out what we would do with the site if we took the site, and the existence of the task force, because I'm not sure they're up to speed on that.
Right. Yeah, but we're gonna give them the context for, why the select board even charge us to do this, why did they form this task force? So that's an important outreach piece. The EPA meeting, which isn't our meeting, that's on the 25th. Some or all of us will be in attendance. That for us is just a listening meeting. Kara has one slide that I gave her, which basically talks about the committees that have been working on this, the 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee and our task force, and the reuse committee is one slide. It just doesn't have a lot of information. It's just sort of because at the end of her presentation, there may be questions about what's the town doing. And I want Kara to be able to say, stay tuned. If there are questions there that pertain to our work, I don't think we want to engage in conversations at that meeting because it's EPA's meeting, but I can't,
Mhm.
I can't say that there won't be something that we have to stand up and say, I don't know. I'll have to kind of play it by ear, but I'd like to defer any participation in that meeting because it's not our meeting. But
That is the 25th.
that's the 25th.
At 6:30.
6:30 at the townhouse. So that, I don't know, maybe I'm too conservative with that, but I think we should just stand back and listen.
I don't think you can be too conservative. Open meeting law will snare us if we're not careful.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We can sit there and listen.
We can sit there, yeah, and you
We could
can
also-
speak,
we could
but
also
we
post
can't
it.
have multiple speaking,
It was a
Yeah.
meeting.
or we can call a
And
meeting.
that gives one more place for people to look for the Zoom link, which
That's a.
they're all
that's
concerned
a
about
good
right
point.
now is
Yeah.
how
One
do I
more way
find
to
the
find
Zoom
us,
link
yeah.
for that?
It's probably, in my opinion, safer to post it as a meeting. We might not have a quorum. But
At the EPA meeting, posted as a meeting, because you're gonna be there.
But the idea would be
Because
to,
it would cover
you don't get into open meeting
if
law trouble, but to
somebody
Pam's point,
sees-
it shows up on the town calendar also.
Right, right.
As-
And
as
if
a-
somebody sees us on the screen or in the hallway, having a conversation over in the corner,
It's just
we're not.
safer.
And our agenda is EPA meeting.
And the minutes can be very brief
Okay.
if we're not
good.
participating in the discussion.
Far more experienced people
Yeah.
doing this than I know, so
I
yeah, yeah.
recommend it.
Chris, take note of that. We'll chat about that offline. David,
If people have questions for us, we can make contact with them and promise to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We give them empowerment, listening, hearing, being respected. Their meeting at the moment. Down the road, you know where to reach us, we know where to reach you, and we can figure out how to address
We
that
can- we can
concern.
Take it up.
the perfect follow-up on that is, we're having a meeting
Yeah,
on
that's what I was
November
gonna say.
9th.
It's like, we can
Yeah.
go further
Yeah.
than that. We
Come
can
to that meeting
say,
and bring that up.
Yes, but what that does is so think of a person asking you a question and not getting an answer from government.
I was just at a meeting, it was a great example of that.
So you want to be able to give as much of an answer and respect to the person asking the question as possible, and come to our meeting is not as much as we could offer.
Even
Flyer.
Even at that meeting, we're soliciting questions of interest and so forth. We're not going to be making pronouncements because we're still in the data collection.
If anybody wants to talk to us or ask, great, terrific, what's your name, number, we can, it's the EPA meeting at the moment, to be continued, and don't forget to come to our meeting in November.
That's the most, that takes us through early November in terms of our outreach. I want to talk about the November 9th meeting. But before I do, as far as outreach, any further ideas of things we ought to be doing before mid-November or after mid-November, or do we want, is it going to evolve from these, from what our listening sessions?
I think the listening sessions are going to guide where outreach goes. That's my sense. But one thing I wanted to mention about the League of Women Voters meeting and all of our outreach in general, from the conversations that I've had with people, you guys especially, but all of you to some degree have been involved in the site like forever. So the history is what comes to mind to catch people up. It's not mostly what they want to hear. What's the status of it now? When's it going to be clean? What can we use it for and how? So all that history, for example, I read the Maximus guy, Bruce,
yeah.
right? He sent that memo around, and it had a lot of history and it had a lot of EPA this and RCRA and acronyms, right?
Yes.
Right.
That's a language. So that, you know, the acronym language, that's an easy one to avoid, right? Because we're not quite in the acronym land that he is. But we should try to avoid the spending a lot of time glazing their eyes over with what isn't really their priority. And so thinking through what, even for the league, where generally people are likely to be at, would help guide your slides or whatever you're going to prepare. So I would spend less time on the history, although the important part of the history that I would stress is the citizen involvement for a long time. Your neighbors, your trustworthy, not government neighbors, have been involved in overseeing the cleanup itself and planning the reuse. So there's a trust issue that's important to stress, to emphasize that. That's a foundation that has put us where we are. And to stress how much cleanup has happened and what remains to be done. Because it's, you know, to the extent that people are worried still about the mess, a lot of, here's what's been, you know, they took buildings down, they took drums away, they, you know, that kind of stuff, and what remains to be done. Those are the kinds of focuses that I've heard and would suggest that would be most valuable to people.
Yeah, and then when I talk about context, I think knowing that there've been a lot of eyes on their site for a long time in the town, knowing that there's been a lot of money spent, knowing that the town has had input into the cleanup plans, which resulted in the, you know, the standards. And knowing that, and this, I think is important, that EPA and the contractor have been very flexible. When they found out issues, they've chased it down, they've got more money for it. The greatest example is sort of the dioxide problem that it wasn't part of the RIFS. But when they found it, they chased it down, they got more money to chase it down, they had a whole separate groundwater thing. Now, I'm not saying that's gonna happen in the future, but just because there's some concern that A, the money won't be there, B, we can't trust the responsible parties. Those are some concern. I want to say, so far, my perspective as a citizen, it's gone very well and it's been very flexible, and, you know, a lot of response to
Pam's waving.
citizen concerns.
Yeah, Pam.
So I think you're missing a point of what the League of Women Voters is gonna ask you about. They're gonna ask you about that budget that just got approved by the select board, where we're spending money on this site, because they care about what goes into town meeting, what goes into
Yeah.
town budgets.
That's
And
fine. I
so
think-
they're gonna wanna know about that, and they're going to very much want to know about, for instance, what we're spending that money on is a good legal review and a good risk assessment that's us, not EPA, not someone else, and emphasizing that to them, that this is us doing our due diligence, not trusting some agency, not trusting, we're doing the review 100%, not just a bunch of volunteers working overtime. So you're right, you don't have to go into the details of too many things. You can use one example of the water being a good example of them rising to the occasion, that we can count on them to do it again. But stick with that. We're doing our due diligence to fill this out, because this could be a great asset to the town, but we have to spend a little money to figure out if we really can use it or not. And the other thing is, they are our best, or not best, but they are a really good recruiting tool to get people to the October 25th meeting, to get people to the November meeting. It would be really nice if we had like a flyer or something for the November meeting in place, where we're ready to say, so that they know in advance when we're going to talk about us doing it versus when EPA is going to talk about what they're doing there. And they will, if we give them attachments of flyers and give them actual flyers, they will get that information out to a whole lot of people that are not just on Nextdoor or some local.
Well,
So
I-
that's a
yeah.
real valuable.
I
resource
think
for
the topic of the November 9th meeting, I want them to be aware of that. I do want them to pass the word around. We're not giving any flyers for Friday, but a part of, aside from the League of Women Voters, we have to talk about how we're going to, and I started talking to Chris about this, how we're going to publicize the November 9th meeting. It'll certainly be on the website. It'll be probably as a public meeting notice. What are the suggestions for, I can't put another article on the bridge. They
It can be an announcement, it doesn't have to be an article.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, the bridge would eat that up. Anything that fills their space, they're all good for. Look at them.
Yeah.
I mean, and they'll write and they'll print what we write.
Or what anybody else writes.
Honest to God, the
Correct
police
or not.
department, oh my God, but that's another conversation. They'll post it.
Entertaining.
And it should be, and that's fine. But I would add to that, and I'm sure you all probably would, we know organizations and we should probably think through, and I can help coordinate that if you want to get those suggestions to me. There's got to be some environmental organizations to make sure to invite. There's got to be some specific invitations, groups that the League of Women Voters might know to reach out to
you want to be the point person?
I'd
on
be
this?
happy to do that. I don't know the town well enough to know who to put on the list. You guys do, but I'd be glad to collect to let know about our meeting that would be interested and do the outreach, yes.
Good.
David, the concert, Delia K has a conservation sustainability coffee once a month.
Pam was there and
yeah,
I'm
Pam was,
and I'm invited to it and I missed it this morning and
yeah,
I
well,
wanted to go.
I really think that's a good place, because pretty much everybody does show up, Pam. That's my,
That's also though a narrow group of people compared to the League of Women Voters. for
yeah, no, I
instance,
mean,
is a group
it's,
that is-
it's one interest group.
They've got the town budgets and who's gonna use that site on their list, as opposed to, we've got the environmentalists, which are the ones that show up as conservation coffee.
Mhm.
There are, you know, the local, like next door groups are a group there that is good for outreach.
Okay, well, let's get that, those suggestions to David. There's also there's the chairs breakfast that you attended.
Mhm.
That's a way to kind of reach out to every committee through the chairs and have them.
And they
Pass it
still
on.
have the date as being the October date, so we
Well,
should
yes,
update
because it
that.
was a couple of days after the last chair's breakfast that
They
we
changed-
suddenly heard it wasn't going to be on
Yeah.
that day.
So you should probably
And
talk
people
to.
were.
I'm not talking about the EPA meeting, I'm talking about our meeting.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
but-
but the EPA meeting that we were encouraging people to come to,
Well, now I'm
That
talking
date
about,
has
now I'm
changed.
talking about, yeah, now I'm talking about our public forum.
I know.
Right.
Just for David's list, PTG presidents is a way to reach schools that's unlike any other method where there's a monthly meeting where you could meet with all the presidents who could then filter information out.
Do you have a point person for the PTG presidents? I know some people. who-
We go through the school committee chairs, probably to Alexa Anderson. I'll give you the contact info. Because what we can do top down, so to speak, is probably not as effective as this. So at the right time.
The more the merrier.
And I
Or-
had a couple of suggestions.
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
I think you should, notify the bridge again about both meetings. I think, there's a thing called news and notices. And Chris will know and Megan will know. And that should be out, it should be, both meetings should be posted on the web right away. Because they're coming right up, especially the October one. And any committee that you guys are involved in, NRC, school committee, all the other committees you're on, they're going to be interested. Economic vitality, Megan and Chris can help you do a lot of this stuff. And I just want to apologize for being late. I was at another meeting where they're having the same issue. They have a public forum on the 17th of October. I said, nobody knows about this. No, if you want input from the public, you've got to give them some notice. So that's my comment. Oh, one more comment about the League of Women Voters. And Paul and I are going to be talking. I agree with Pam, but I got a call today from Diane Proctor, who is running it. And what they're really going to probably be asking about is process. What happens after you guys make your final report? Is it going to town meeting? Or what are the select board going to do? And I said, I don't know any of that yet. I can't speak for a future select board. But those are the kind of questions that Paul and I are going to bat around tomorrow and try to figure out how we're going to deal with it. But they're very interested in citizen engagement and process.
Well, I'm very interested in process also, you know, it took a while to get to the point where we have this task force, but you know, worst thing that could happen is we deliver our report October 31st and then they're crickets. So, you know, I think I'm not on the select board, so I think you need to help define the process and from the select board point of view. I think Article 15 Article 2 from 2015 said that there has to be a public hearing, not a warrant article, if there's a decision on that. So that's something that's been preordained if the select board wants to move on acquisition. But beyond that, there's nothing that's been codified that I know of.
I thought I just had, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was to say that the slide you put together for I think the November meeting where you kind of lay out the sequence of steps and the timeframes for that. I think putting that in front of people so that they understand this is not imminent. I mean, this is a multi-year process, which is going to be deliberative at separate stages. So that there isn't a sense that, well, we're going to issue a report and then the town's going to acquire the site, right? It's a much longer term process. And actual
Especially,
use
especially if
is
we're gonna like
not
inform the PTG groups, you know, you don't want mommies and daddies showing up
Yeah.
and finding out that the first soccer field is gonna be open when their kids are out of graduate school. You know, I mean,
Right.
which may be the case.
Right, yeah,
You wanna set expectations.
yeah, I mean, it's at least 5 years, right, before anything's gonna happen.
Your kids will
post-cleanup.
be in college, you can go home now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Well-
that, that one fact isn't well known that, the disconnect is it's not gonna be ready till 2028. So what's the rush?
yeah,
That's why I put together the slide. And I
Right.
put, I told the
Yeah.
select board, yes, but if there's a decision to be made.
Right, yeah.
Something happens after your decision, whether you acquire it or whether, you have to track the private, influence the private parties who might buy it. There has to be something that happens after that point.
Because it's likely gonna be public input at each of those stages, right?
Oh, yeah, there'll be
Yeah.
other committees, multiple
Right.
committees working on this.
The thought I had was that you're speaking to a lot of potentially interested users and we're already getting that input. They should also be notified about the meeting. So the list that I'm putting together should include parties from the town or the people who, anybody who's contacted you and said, hey, you should use it for this, who represents in anything as opposed to just some person on the street. Please get those names to me as well. They should be on the invite list.
To make your life easier, is it not true that the town has the capacity to push information about certain meetings and certain committees?
News and notices.
Right, but I think you can sort of tailor that a little bit. So I think that might be a conversation for Chris is, because I think you can opt in for certain news and notes. Or do we,
Yeah, I'm getting emails from Zanetta Purnell at EPA on their meeting. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's a question for Kara. Are you sending out notices about your meeting to a wide email list in town, Kara?
So we have sent out the email notification that you got from Zanetta to everyone who's on our site email list right now. So that is people who have expressed interest in the site previously. So it's a fairly limited list, is everyone who's gotten an email notification. We'll be sending postcards to people within, I think it's about a half to 3/4 of a mile maybe of the site, kind of like all the abutting neighbors to the property. And then we're putting together a flyer that'll be out next week that we're going to send to kind of all committees in town that we have reference to, such as yourselves, with a request for you to then forward it onward to people we do not have electronic communication with.
And that flyer is gonna have the Zoom link in it for the meeting.
It will have a QR code on it, which brings you to the site profile page that has the Zoom link on it.
We've got a lot of old people in the town. Can it also have an HTML link?
I mean, it,
Well, there's also
That's a good
paper.
question. I mean,
Oh,
it will
it
have a link to this profile page without a doubt on it, right? Because it's electronic, right? The postcard doesn't because it's paper. So nobody wants to type out a Zoom meeting address.
I'm sorry, but I've got to agree with Pam. I
Yeah.
mean, somebody ought to type out the Zoom meeting address.
Yeah, Carol, we want a PDF of the flyer as well to pass out.
Correct,
There are a lot of
right? It
people
will
who
just,
don't print them.
right, the flyer will be primarily, it'll just be an electronic document that we're sharing. Yeah, so I can talk to Dee and see if she can put the actual link on there too.
Actually, November 9th meeting, EPA is well in control of their meeting. I think the idea of having a flyer for that meeting is also a good idea. The Recreation Commission, when they were doing a survey, part of the strategic plan. They put out a flyer and they put it everywhere in town.
Mhm.
Cafe Nero and BD Center and everywhere there are people. So I think having a piece of paper, and but I would wait till, well, I don't know what, the EPA meeting is late in October, so I don't want to confuse everybody, but we ought to think about having we're gonna have at least one more meeting here, of our task force before our November 9th meeting, if not two. We have to talk about that, so.
Don't you want the flyer at the EPA meeting?
Yes,
Flyer.
I was gonna make that request also. If you could
Yes,
have a flyer for your November 9th meeting, I could say there's additional information
'cause
on the
it's
flyer on the
pretty
table in the
close.
back.
it's 2 weeks later. Yeah. David, you want to work on a flyer?
Yes, and I'm writing a description of the meeting now and as we talk, how to describe it. But in general, it's the kind of thing that you and I have talked about. Dear Concord, we're gonna have this meeting to introduce ourselves, let you know what the process is. We're in the early stage of our fact finding. We want to introduce ourselves and listen to your questions, hear your interests, so that it can inform the process going forward.
When introduce ourselves.
That's the description.
Introduce ourselves. Here are the issues that we're researching, and here's how we're doing our work, basically. And that's sort of the slides that I suggested that each of the work streams do. You have to put that all in the flyer, but it's, yes.
We're looking
Here we
into
are.
questions
This is what
like,
we-
yeah, right.
If you look at the meeting announcement for this meeting, that had a Zoom link and it had an agenda on it. Something like that includes a paragraph summary of what the meeting's gonna be about and some exciting language about, come talk to us about this. Here's the Zoom link or whatever, and it's something that could be used both as paper and as an attachment to be sent around would be really.
Yeah, the various forms are to be determined as well, electronic, paper posting and so forth. But one of the important things in this message and at our meeting, we're not quite there yet, is that it needs to feel empowering to people, not being talked down to, but to come and be helpful and contribute to. Your hand is on the steering wheel of this kind of feeling. So I'll look for language that allows that.
Functionally kind of want it also on the agenda for the meeting that gets posted because it is your meeting to post online. That's where people go to, if they're going to be doing it online, to have that information as
I
part
don't
of
think
the-
we have an agenda for the.
I don't think a specific agenda would be advisable.
As far as
You
public.
have to write an agenda because it's a public meeting that you are all getting together.
We can describe what it's going to be without
have
having
a
steps in
agenda
1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
Just a piece of paper that gets posted on
Okay.
the town calendar and get it in the same place is what I'm saying. Get it where people can look
The
for it.
flyer should announce the meeting, public forum, introduce ourselves, hear from you, come.
I would say that's an agenda,
Yeah.
introduce the committee's mission and process. Questions, comments, concerns from the public. I mean, that could be the agenda.
Premature question, but, our next meeting, I think it was scheduled for the 17th, for 2 weeks from now, but, we should have one meeting, at least one meeting, before the 9th, if not two. And the reason, we probably need to go over, our slides. And I want to get so I put together the dummy slide deck, which had my introductory stuff, and please, I don't want to go through the slide deck right now unless you want to have comments. Please give me comments on the front end of that, but the back end of it where I want each of the work streams. So let's say it's an hour meeting. I'm gonna spend 10-15 minutes and you guys are gonna spend 15-20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Well, I'll have to time it out. But I'd like the work streams to describe, what you're doing, what issues you're looking at, and how you're doing your work. So we should have the same. Let me put that up here. Let me share that slide deck. So I suggested that, so I'm going to introduce the work streams, talk about what they are. It's going to kick off with this, right? The slide which has the 4 work streams. I don't know if I have the right titles, so let me know. So you'll be there. So introduce them one at a time. Yeah, who you guys are, you gotta introduce yourselves, description of the work and the objectives of the work stream. How are you going about, methods, maybe not the, it sounds a little scientific, but what are you doing? You're meeting with committees, you're having public outreach, you're researching X, Y, and Z, you're talking to other towns about their experiences, you're meeting the town council, what are the methods that, and then how will the results of what you're doing will be used to make decisions. And I think that's all I had. The last one could be, the results. What are you gonna do with the information? Is there any other, I mean, it's a simple construct, and there are other ways of thinking about it, Court.
The only one I'm having trouble with is the last one. The simple answer is it's gonna get poured into a report for the select board, but I'm not
So
sure what else we can do with that.
We'll rephrase that. How would you like to present? So after you talk about what the objectives are, you're gonna do your work and what happens, is that it? Is that the end of it? How are you gonna do the work? Or you can't talk about results, you can't talk about opinions.
Well, at the very beginning of the meeting, when you describe the process, basic process before going into these subsections. And then at the end, we write up a report and that's going to advise the select
Well,
board.
no, I know that, but I'm saying each work stream,
Oh,
how do you end with your, I know.
How about
we're good.
this one is, Why,
Sorry.
why do we care about what those things? And you say, which things that you are looking into would make a difference into how we might consider what the town would do.
Yeah, some idea. of What are the critical elements that this
I like
work
that.
stream brings
Why
forward?
it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you say, okay, here's the work stream, here's the objectives. Here's how we're gonna do the work, and why is this piece important? Yeah, that's a better way of phrasing it. Why is this important?
I assume each group is gonna present. I'm just wondering, it'd be good to have a time frame that.
Yeah.
for us to work within, because this can get very long. It's just.
Sure.
It just Strikes me
Four
that,
slides.
right,
If
but this is a lot of, it's a lot of content just
Well,
here for four.
The
scenes and
title is
four
not a big deal.
Right,
This has some content. But yeah,
Yeah.
the result, I'm sure you can get through this. We haven't talked about the timing of our meeting. We just set a date. I think this will be a 90-minute meeting. So that's a question more. The EPA meeting is a 90-minute meeting. I can't I want to leave at least half an hour for,
what time is it? Where, location? I forget.
this is
Our meeting.
7 PM at the townhouse.
I
So,
think the EPA will have a lot more content too. isn't
sorry?
it? I think EPA will have a lot more content
Yeah,
than we'll have.
remember, this is sort of, we're introducing ourselves, we want to listen.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
You know,
It's
it-
open-ended, it seems to me, within reason.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
We're here to ask you what,
Well, but I want to make sure that we don't spend more than, if this is a 90-minute meeting, we don't spend more than 60 minutes.
Oh, not
Less,
even,
less,
not 30
less,
minutes,
less.
30
40
minutes.
minutes.
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
10 minutes.
30 minutes. So I think,
do I hear?
And may I add something to the work streams? In the ending thing? Please let us know if you have ideas for what we're not, we should be inquiring in that
Yeah.
we haven't included.
right,
Ask.
yeah.
Hands on the steering wheel, the feeling of control.
To that point, we might even want to have a comment card so that not everybody needs airtime.
Yeah.
Some people don't want
Right.
airtime, but they
Yeah.
sure want to get something to us.
Well, we'll also have and distribute at the meeting, and in various places, how to get back in touch with us, how to stay in touch. We need to think about some, we have this town website.
Oh, not,
Yeah, before I get to that, so I like the last slide, why is this important? We're gonna do Q&A at the end. I don't want to invite questions for every work stream,
Right.
because then it's gonna take forever. And we're gonna hold up questions to the end.
Right.
But I think finishing this, why is this important to the decision? I think that's a good way to end it. Thank you, Pam. It's a good suggestion. As opposed to this one. So think about, 4 slides per work stream and, Rich.
Would it be appropriate to encourage, since each work stream has been introduced, encourage people to come up after the meeting to the identified individuals and say, come up and talk to us about what we haven't mentioned or what you think we really need to consider, who we ought to talk to.
Absolutely. I mean, we have,
You know, I just think sometimes, you know, the meeting's over and everybody walks out the door, but sometimes the conversations afterwards is most important.
I'll put together an agenda with timing on this and we'll review it the next time we get together to make sure we're all comfortable with
It's
that.
more
Carl?
approachable.
Well, one possibility would be to divide, after the committee presents, you could have a session on general comments and questions, and then you could have a breakout session if people want to talk to the work stream about their individual. I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but it's another way to structure the meeting. You want it, if you want
I
to.
think work groups is, I'm gonna guess at 9 o'clock at night. Hanging around is less of a way of getting you feedback than.
Yeah.
Be in touch and here's the guy on that one and here's the person on that one.
Or even if we had an hour for comments and discussion, 40 minutes could be general, and then you could have 20 minutes for, it's something to think about. You know, if you want to get direct feedback, you'll get more at the meeting, I think, than you'll get after the meeting, so.
I think so. And I think the chair has wisely said, when everybody wraps up, okay, we mostly had this so that we could listen to you all and hear your things. One of the things that we want to hear is, do you have any suggestions for what the work streams haven't covered that you think should? But that's just one area, but specify that one as an invitation for them to comment, and then it'll come up as part of the conversation, hopefully. Mike.
Yeah, you know, it's gonna be an open-ended discussion. I want to have questions, I want to have concerns, I want to have suggestions, you know. We'll, if it's a successful meeting, we'll get some lively, we'll get a lot of people there. B, we'll have a lively discussion, so. But, Matt, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think I was just gonna say, if you're contemplating having the meeting be 90 minutes long and you have a 30-minute presentation, I would think a lot about why you have 90 minutes. And so while I think you're trying to keep it seems like you're trying to keep this meeting introductory, while at the same time giving people an opportunity to give you some information. It might be helpful to decide whether or not you're just sort of like, you know, here's our information. We'll reach out, or let us know if you want to talk, and we'll talk after, and have it be a short meeting, or have it be a long meeting and think about why you're having that extra 60 minutes. And just hearing you all talk about it, I would recommend, if you're going to have it be 90 minutes, do something like Carl suggested and break it down into a more informal way, so that you don't end up having a 60-minute discussion that goes on with, hopefully you get a big group. I've run a lot of meetings about Superfund sites with crowds that got uncomfortable, and in a big crowd, when you don't have it, when there isn't as much to talk about, it just is less productive. And I like the structure. I like the structure of breaking things down when you have more time. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, so right now, my sense is, I'll think about this. I'm gonna leave the discussion a little bit open-ended, depending on how it's going. We can either, if there's good group discussion, fine. If there's not, we can break up, or I want to be able to go. Yeah, I want to be able to go different ways in this. But look, as far as I don't think that we're going to get through the introduction 4 work streams in a half hour. I think it's going to be 45 minutes. So you just do the math, 10 minutes apiece, plus a little bit more. So, anyway, I'll lay out the agenda and we'll think about it and see what makes sense. Ma'am.
So, I was thinking that, dividing up into groups doesn't work if half the people show up on Zoom. And can you go to the end of your presentation?
The end.
Yeah,
Which?
going through to the very left slide. Do you have the slide?
The,
up
the,
there?
oh,
I'm sorry.
my slides?
So, yeah, so what I was thinking of is that it might be nice to end your presentation with a list of questions that you want answers to from the people that are there, that you want opinions on, as something to put up on the screen. And then if it's lagging and people aren't asking questions, ask those questions and say, does anybody have an interest in this particular thing or that particular thing? So that might be a nice thing for us to come up with some questions to literally ask at the end, to give people some stimulation for what kind of questions we want to hear from them.
Yeah, I gotta think about that. Could be leading the audience to the questions. Could be a little risky. It could be productive and or risky. You know, for example, what are your concerns about using the site? Okay, boy, do I want to ask that question? What are your concerns about? I mean, what suggestions you have for improving the work streams? I can see there being kind of easy questions and not so easy ones.
I wonder if an alternative would be to suggest something in the form of, to conclude the meeting. This is a very high level rubric that this committee is going to use. And you reveal those basic questions. And this is the lens through which we're going to bring a report to the select board. We're going to want to know about human safety. We're going to want to know about town liability. We're going to want to know about reuse opportunities, and we can lay them out.
Well, but you're laying
That comes out in the work
You're
streams.
laying it on your work streams.
That's what the work streams are working.
I understand. That's my point. My point is, we're not asking for questions. We're in the business of generating information so that the town can answer the question through the select board. What next?
Well,
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth having more of a discussion of what are the outcomes we want from this meeting? What do we want to learn from the meeting? Because that might guide us to questions we're ready to ask, or conversations we want to kind of seed if the meeting's, you know, not going as we anticipate. So, I mean, obviously we want to introduce people to our work. Yes, but there might be more that we want to accomplish, or specific things we want to learn. Like, do we want to learn how people would prefer we communicate with them, or how often we come back to them to share, you know, the progress we're making, or something like that. So I do think just having an open-ended meeting where we present and we just hope that the conversation and the questions goes in the direction we want it to, without being more intentional to learn what we think is important for our work. You know,
we're throwing out a lot of, we're throwing out a lot of pretty weighty topics. Okay, legal pathways, reuse options, risk and safety, and that kind of, you know, I think people, if they pay attention, are gonna have questions, and we don't have to prompt those questions. But the objective, number one, is introduce the task force. Here's our work. And to have the initial listening session. I mean, I want to listen. I mean, if we present all this and there are crickets in the room, I don't know. That would be unfortunate, but I don't think it's going to happen. Court.
My only concern about that is that I think it has to be framed with, we want to know about your questions so we can incorporate them into our questions and our work, as opposed to the presumption that your questions require our answers and our responses at this point. Because number one, we don't want to get dodgy, but number two, we don't want to be answering questions hugely prematurely. That's the tricky part of this, I think.
Yeah, you know, we want to hear about your suggestions, your comments, your concerns, and advice. Bring it on. Those 4 categories. Got any of those? I don't know. I would for this meeting, I would prompt any specific questions other than those.
Nor would I, and the invitation on all of the information that's inviting people to come, it's going to say, we want your questions, we want your interest. Anybody who shows up is going to have some. They're not going to need any prompting.
Having a last slide with those 4 things that you mentioned, Paul, would be a really great way to have that up on the screen to encourage people to feel safe to ask questions.
Yeah, probably at the end of the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
there isn't any end. Okay, so we're going to have more discussions about this. I want to put together. I want you to think about, you know, the 4 slides, how to describe the work streams. Take a look at the slide deck, and please give me comments, suggestions. The next meeting we have, we'll spend a lot of it sort of going through this. This is just sort of kicking this off, and I just threw a lot of raw slides up there. I do want to get to the last topic here, just to kind of throw it out there in the and also have public comments, and that's the the institutional controls. And the reason why I put that, this is just a discussion. I want to make sure you all are on the same page. Carl asked me, do we have any specific presentation? And I said, no, I just wanted to put these out there. Bruce sent this out. There've been questions about institutional controls. There's concerns. I know I spoke to people on the select board about how we're going to manage these institutional controls. How we're going to develop the site if the town requires it around these controls. But I don't know if you've seen these, but I just want to kind of look at them. And in my opinion, these aren't particularly arduous, but there has to be a means to manage it. So the first one is really important. This is where you can't dig in areas where there's contamination below 10 feet. In clean areas in the site where there's never, you can dig. So this is areas of the site where there's that there's soil. They're not removing more than 10 feet of soil. The top 10 feet of soil is going to be clean. Or it's going to be brought in clean. So but they're not going down deeper than that. So there'll probably be areas, and maybe those will be right in the middle where the buildings were, that you won't be able to dig below 10 feet. So if the town owns it and some developer wants to come in there, the permitting and the inspection has to make sure that's controlled. So just, I don't worry about teenagers who come in with a backhoe or a shovel, dig it down to 10 feet. That would be some pretty hefty high school students. But I think this is a serious institutional control that will need to be managed and constrains the development. Seriously. So that I'm just going to go through this very quickly. Groundwater. Can't use groundwater for any purpose. It's for, including, I think, recycling cooling water, although that's not explicit in here. Mr. Roseborough asked about recycling, and it's not in here, but use of groundwater for any purpose, drinking, industrial processed water, is prohibited. So nobody can put a well in on this site. It's pretty clear.
So that would exclude ground source heat pumps, right?
I'm sorry.
That would exclude ground source heat pumps.
That's the question. If it's a closed loop,
Yeah.
is that prohibited?
It's not explicit in here. I think we're gonna have to ask that question. I don't wanna tee that up for a later discussion about closed loop on groundwater. It doesn't say that, but industrial processed water it connotes discharge. I'm not sure what all these connote drinking water discharge. It doesn't connote closed loop systems,
You
but
can also have closed loop systems that are on, in a grid that are flat, only 6 feet underground. You don't have to go below 10 feet.
Right, this
So-
is really targeting the use of site groundwater, so the removal and use of water that's on site right now
for any purpose.
for any purpose.
Okay. That's how I read it.
Can I ask a question about the below 10 feet though? Like, if, say we want to build a 5-story building and you have to have pilings that go down 20 feet, can you do that if you're not extracting, you're just driving piles into the ground? I don't know. I'm not just
Do
something.
you want
to
a quick, would you like a quick answer on that right now?
It sounds like a
Yeah.
yes, no answer. Go ahead.
So potentially, yes. Normally what it means is there's a process in place in which you have to have a plan to deal with any soil that you interact with that's below 10 feet.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I mean, we should have more discussions on these, but for now, I just want to go introduce them. Prohibiting disturbance of extraction wells and treatment systems. So there will be several. I'm not sure exactly where they're going to be located. This is category 3. So the treatment systems that have to be avoided. The buildings, fence, I don't know exactly how they'll be fenced off, but we can't interfere with those, but those will be known, those will be visible, those won't be any surprise. Holding basin, no surprise there. The holding basin is a no-fly zone. It remains to be seen. In the reuse committee, we talked about parking lot over that. I don't know if that is going to happen or
I
land,
think
or
he said that we can't do
I
that.
think we just
Yeah.
don't, you know,
I
it's,
think it's gonna be
Natural Resource
vegetation.
Commission doesn't want to do that either.
Yeah,
because of its
so
proximity to the
that would be, you know, an area that, you know, is just can't do anything with.
No.
You have to.
Recreation department can't use it for a skating rink, just so that they should
No
know.
basketball court, yeah, okay. And this last one, which is kind of interesting, so, way back in remediation, there's a question about vapor intrusion. This is, you know, if there are volatiles in the groundwater, there can be vapor that comes to the surface and then intruded into living spaces. It's not clear that that is going to happen here. And I think EPA, I use the word punted, but kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit and said, if there is development over an area where plumes exist, they'll have to be monitoring, we'll have to determine if there is vapor intrusion. And if there is vapor intrusion, there have to be mitigation systems. So I asked Bruce, who pays for that? And he said, they do, EPA pays, the town does not pay for the investigation or for the mitigation. If that's wrong, Karen, just tell me right now, but I think, so it.
Isn't there an escrow account for that money too?
I can't speak to escrow, but that should be covered, yes, by the consent decree.
So that just means we have to be mindful that if there is a building over an area where there might be, and it's not clear where those are, that'll have to be investigated and a mitigation system will be put in. But I'm not sure what the management aspects of that is, other than to be aware that if you build something, it has to be investigated. So those are, I wanted just to throw those out there, and I don't view any of these as particularly arduous, but other towns have dealt with this, and we're learning from other towns how, and the economics. You know, in my conversation with Terry Ackerman, my sense was, well, through permitting and inspection, and somebody has to do that, you know, and the special permitting and inspections. You know, when somebody, you give a building permit, you have to make sure that, you know, you're on top of that. You know, that, you know, you can't just walk away from that, you have to inspect it especially, so maybe additional requirements for inspection. It looks like, Terry, you want to say something? But,
Right, these are, very good high level, ICs. And
Yeah.
to my mind, it's all gonna come down to the detail of how the town will manage and really be on top of these things. If there's any problem, who's the point person? I don't want to see a consultant in Iowa. It's got to be somebody who really knows it and is on staff here. So it's all going to come down to how it's managed, in my mind.
exactly, and that's something that I think Carl and Pam are going to tackle in their section, making suggestions of how and who manages that. Whether it's an existing department, whether it's a full-time employee, whether you're just what's involved in that management.
One of our first questions for that, Terry, I don't know if you know the answer to this, is there are some existing sites the town owns where has been contamination. So I think we're interested in learning, you know, what are the restrictions on those sites, what oversight, who's responsible for that, what we learn from what the town's already doing. That might help us figure out what to do with the site. Obviously, this is more comprehensive and has more involved, but.
One quick thought, the holding basin's gonna have a wall and a fence and all that sort of stuff, but there's gonna have to be some sort of policing, emphasizing the policing of no high school kids climbing over the fence and all that sort of stuff. So I
don't
wonder
think there'll
whether.
be any fence. It's gonna be just like
It's
an
the
open grass
bentonite
meadow.
wall.
Yeah,
and the
the
cap.
bentonite, but that's 20 feet to
I thought I
80 feet
remember, Bruce-
underground.
I know, but I thought I remember Bruce talking about some sort of fencing. If there's no monitoring of it, fine. If